Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. When we last left off in our journey through A Link to the Past, the maiden that we had freed in the Swamp Palace told us of other portals to the Dark World scattered throughout Hyrule. This was a very valuable hint, as we need to find another one to actually access the next portion of the map that we need to get to in the Dark World. In this case, we find one entrance just outside of Skull Woods. This is an aptly named location, as skull and bones just are scattered throughout the whole forest. There's skull heads that you need to enter, and there's like bone archways you can walk under. It's pretty creepy. The defining feature of this dungeon, though, aside from the creepiness, which we'll talk about a little bit more, is actually a very unique bit of navigation that we don't see too much in the series, I don't think. And in this case, what I'm talking about is there's actually many different entrances to this dungeon scattered throughout the forest. Some are kind of your more traditional entrances. They're just like straight up caves you can walk into. Others are like holes that you have to fall down into parts of the dungeon from, and you can't go out. You have to find an exit somewhere else. And even beyond that, there's like hidden holes under like bushes and stuff that you can cut and fall into. As put by the Nintendo Player's Guide, they say, the passages of Skull Dungeon were connected by a network of dungeon entrances on the forest floor. These underground tunnels were loaded with dangerous traps and villainous creatures. When explorers made it to the end of each passage, they would have to temporarily leave the dungeon and look for another entrance. The entrance to the final chamber was located in the northwest corner of the woods. So here we're seeing an advancement, I would say, of what the Desert Palace introduced. So it gets a little bit more complicated, and it's still kind of, it's actually pretty close to the Desert Palace in terms of the design and layout and complexity. I find this to be a really cool feature with entering and exiting the dungeon. It's not just the rooms contained within the entrance, but also the overworld. Like, the overworld itself is, like, kind of the navigation. In fact, I think it's kind of the more complex navigation. One thing I think that's worth pointing out while you're popping in and out of the dungeon is there's a returning enemy from The Legend of Zelda, which is the Wallmaster, which is just like this, creepy hand that drops down from the ceiling, and it's constant. It's almost in every room in this dungeon, and they'll take you and they'll grab you and take you right back to the last entrance you came in. Luckily, it's never a huge setback like it could be in The Legend of Zelda, because there actually aren't too many rooms in this dungeon, and there's a lot of entrances, so you're really usually ever only going like a room or two back. So it's kind of fitting, actually. It kind of really works. And, the creepy hand works with the skull theme. It's good new enemy. So also, because there aren't too many rooms in the dungeon, it keeps the layout within somewhat simple. And it's really like the exiting and entering the dungeon at different locations that can kind of get a little bit more disorienting. Playing it through this last time I did, though, I found it like the appropriate amount. It does kind of have that similar challenge that a Zelda dungeon has, with surprisingly fewer rooms, at least I think. This is especially the case because some of the entrances actually kind of end up connecting with ones you've explored already, like especially where there's like the holes you fall down. Of course, you can't exit there, so you have to eventually work your way kind of to an area you've been, or maybe a new area, but it all ends up like kind of coming together more in the end. There's obviously still like their own paths that are disconnected, but you kind of are like unraveling the dungeon as you go through, which is kind of cool. Again, I don't think it's not too tricky, most of the drops will lead to things like the map or compass. But then there's a few like key noteworthy spots that are, tie into like the overall progression you have to do. One is likely the first entrance you actually make into the dungeon. You'll see like this chest that you can't reach. There's like pits on the other side of it and a wall blocking you. You can only really get to it after venturing further to a different area in the dungeon where you get the big key, and then you have to backtrack to an area more close to the original entrance you came in which you have to fall into a different hole to basically get to the other side of the pits and the wall where you originally saw the chest. And then, you can use the big key there and get the fire rod. So I love that little bit of navigation there. And of course now, you get the fire rod, and like in all the other dungeons so far, I would say it changes what's happening now a little bit. One big way the fire rod can help is we have a return again of another classic enemy in the Gibdos, who are these mummy-like creatures, and they take many hits. They don't really like bounce back from your sword hits as much, but the fire rod, it easily burns these guys up. So with them and the skulls and the Wallmasters, this actually makes for kind of a creepy dungeon. And it works, I think, too, alongside its like Hyrulean, the Lost Woods counterpart, which is a bit more whimsical, you know what I mean? Obviously you've got like some weird creepy thieves hanging out in the Lost Woods, but otherwise, like, I think this continues kind of that mirror world theme that we've had established with the past two dungeons. I think this still fits there really well. So I'm pleasantly surprised by that. But anyway, another way the fire rod changes things is it's similar to many of the other dungeons where it acts as a key that allows us to get to the final portion of the dungeon. This is laid out actually pretty well in the Nintendo Player's Guide, where they refer to the burning of the big skull. The largest skull in Skull Woods served as the entrance to Mothula's chamber. Legends say that Link, who slew the giant beast, opened the entrance to its chamber by burning the blocking bones. The item which he used was hidden within the confines of the Skullwood dungeon. Of course, this is the fire rod. And there's this cool scene where you light the skull and it burns up and it reveals the final entrance. It's pretty epic. And it's also kind of cool because it's like relatively in the same location as like the Master Sword in the Light World. So, mirror worlds, ooh. Even though you don't use like the big key here, it does feel like similar in the other dungeons where you use the big key and then like tensions start to ramp up. It feels, a little bit more linear as you race to the boss from here. It feels a little bit more linear too if you were able to avoid earlier in the dungeon what I would refer to as a troll room. It's kind of awful. Actually, I think someone referred to the concept of a troll room in the Desert Palace video, where they talked about one room that you can kind of enter and it gives you nothing, just enemies attack you, and it's just kind of a troll. I didn't really think that was too bad because it's just kind of one room off to the side and it doesn't really cost you too much time. I was like, okay, whatever. This one, I feel like it's more of a negative in this dungeon, in my opinion. It's a specific room because it requires you to do sort of a neat navigational puzzle to enter it, where you have to fall down in a different room, step on a floor switch, which will clear these pits you can cross, and then you even have to spend a key to get into it. But then when you get to the other side, there's nothing in there but enemies and falling floor tiles. Like they could at least put like a chest with some rupees or some reward in there. That would have been nice, but no, this room, it's just a troll and it kind of sucks. Regardless of that, there's so many things here that I've obviously been praising, and to the larger point, if you didn't waste your key on this door, you'll get to the final set of rooms with an extra key, which is nice. If you didn't, there's one minor offshoot you go on to get the key. But otherwise, it is ramping tension, and the final run here, I think they also describe well in the Nintendo Player's Guide, where they say, under the forest floor. The passage of Skull Dungeon ultimately led adventurers to the chamber of the dungeon's most feared enemy, Mothula. In preparing to enter Mothula's hideout, warriors equipped themselves with the fire rod and made sure that all of their magic bottles were filled with potions or fairies. And they're right here to point out that you should probably have something in these bottles, preferably magic, I'd say, or potion, whatever. Blue potion if you can afford it, because, for example, there are like a ton of Gibdos in this run that you'll be tempted to burn. Especially there's one room where you have to light all the torches to open the door. Kind of a little puzzle there, but there's Gibdos running around that get in your way, and you're either accidentally or more tempted to burn them up to get rid of them. And it uses so much magic, obviously. So you're definitely going to want extra magic going into the battle with Mothula. Luckily, if there's any issue, it's like I said, there's not too many rooms. It's not too hard to just head to the entrance of that particular part of the dungeon, use the mirror to head to the light world, go get the supplies you need, fly around with the bird if you got the bird express as some call it, and then come right back to the entrance. It's the Lost Woods is a little bit more navigable than getting through the Skull Woods, and now that you've made, you can like leave that mirror spot to come back to. But anyway, that could be, I guess, a negative for some people, is if you aren't prepared with like magic and stuff. Certain parts you just can't even get by. But yeah, I think this is a great ramping up tension to finally get us to Mothula. And I quote, "This giant moth is no friendly butterfly. Conserve magic power as Link makes his way through the Skull Palace because he will want to use the fire rod on Mothula. If he runs out of magic powder and doesn't have any magic potion to refill his magic meter, use the sword on Mothula, but use extreme caution. Mothula's lair is very dangerous. The floors move and shift directions. The spikes release from the walls and travel across the floor, and Mothula will serve up a triple beam attack. The third precious crystal will be your reward for defeating Mothula." So, of course, this fight, it's nuts. You've got the floors and the spikes going. It's really hard to dodge and attack at the same time, especially for new players. But again, we see the different kind of options afforded to you in this game, which I'm a fan of course. It's way more practical to use the dungeon item of the fire rod because it has more range and does like way more damage. But if you run out of magic, things can get real tricky, obviously. One thing I love about this game, though, is that it's only as hard as you really make it, You can come guns blazing, not worrying about your magic refills, and still power your way through and try to sword it. Or you can come fully loaded with potions and make it, slightly easier. Pretty solid boss here. Not my favorite, but still overall pretty solid. After you defeat Mothula, we get another bit of lore from the maiden, some foundational Zelda lore. They tell us, when someone evil gains the Triforce, a hero from the bloodline of the Knights of Hyrule will appear to defeat him. That is, of course, the player. And we gotta keep going on our journey. But before we do that, let's rank this dungeon. Now here's where I'm struggling to rank them. So I felt that Palace of Darkness had a tighter and more quintessential non-linear Zelda design style that I love. that put it above Swamp Palace for me. I thought Swamp Palace is pretty tight in its design too, you know, and a good linear counterpart, but thematically stronger than Palace of Darkness, I think. Now, Skullwoods, I think it's not as tight, if that makes sense, as the other two. It's kind of intentionally so, but it's way more thematically interesting than both. And I don't know. I think this might be a controversial pick, a controversial ranking, but I'm going to put it at number 2. Palace of Darkness is kind of a prototype for me for what like kind of the perfect or my ideal Zelda dungeon is. So I'm going to stand behind it still. Skullwoods actually had that on my top 20 when Zelda Dungeon asked us to give our top 20 dungeons. I had Skullwoods on there. It's kind of the most memorable from the game, that and Hyrule Castle. But yeah, I think honestly that's what I'm gonna do. I know, again, Palace of Darkness, it's a little bit less clear like what it's supposed to be other than the Dark World version of the Eastern Palace. But I still think I just love the navigation of that one so much. Though I will say these top 3 I have here are like kind of a trifecta for me. They're kind of like similar to the first 3 dungeons of the game, kind of like 3 alternating ideas of what a Zelda dungeon could be. So that's my ranking, and I'm going to stick to it. Come at me if you think I'm wrong. But, you know, these are all great. A Link to the Past has been only great dungeons, I think. So, yeah, before we get out of here, I want to say you probably noticed that there's, I posted a video of me playing some Resident Evil over on Twitch. And, yeah, I think I'm going to be streaming over there now. I'm trying to do, like, every Sunday or most Sundays. So, you know, if you don't mind it being on the channel, maybe I'll keep posting the playback or whatever, the saved video file on the YouTube channel for those of you who don't have Twitch. But yeah, you can go check me out on there at twitch.tv/GooeyFame. You know, let me know what you think, and if maybe there's some other games you like to see me play, I'd think about it, but I don't know. Anyway, give the video a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.